I will now request Mr. Suresh Reddy, who's a Sioux Sherpa, to provide some supplementary remarks. And sir, we will then have a question and answer session from the audience. So Suresh, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. I think I personally am privileged to be working with our Sherpa because I've seen in the interactions there that perhaps he's the most highly regarded and respected Sherpa because there are very few who can match his experience and expertise. He having been the Minister for Environment, he was also chairing the Commission on Interlinking of the Rivers, and of course, Minister for Trade and Commerce, then Minister for Railways, and he's also held other multiple portfolios along with these main portfolios. So what I've seen is that in the meetings when he's speaking up, naturally, everybody's keen to benefit from his expertise and his experience in the different sectors. And what is interesting is also today the issues which are really challenging and which is being addressed are the issues on which he has been the minister in charge of. So that way the relevance is in that much more direct and important in terms of what we bring to the table for in the G20 process or be it in the G7, number one. And today also I must really thank Ambassador Mohan Kumar for facilitating this interaction. And for me personally, it is a privilege to be here in front of such a distinguished group of my senior colleagues. Really, thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for coming here today. It is indeed a privilege for me to be here. And I do look forward to benefiting from your experience and ideas and suggestions on as we go forward into preparations for 2022 summit. Currently, what is the status of play? That is a point. And here, as you heard earlier, Ambassador Mohan Kumar set the tone by pointing out to the state of flux in all the three architectures, be it the economic, political, or the security or international architectures. But frankly speaking, today what is happening is that we have two major architectures which have emerged. One is you have the East Asia Summit, which has become, really speaking, the political and security architecture, which is dominating the discourse. And when you look at issues of concern, it is basically the East Asia Summit which is directly involved in those issues, and where you have all the actors present in the same room and engaged in the conversation. And similarly, the other major architecture which is actually setting the global governance agenda is the G20. Whichever be the summit, whatever it is, but the fact is that it is the G20 which sets the global agenda, number one. And number two, it is also the only platform where you have all the multilateral institutions, whether it's a UN Secretary General, whether it's a President of the World Bank, or whether it's the IMF Chief, or WHO DG, whoever it is, or WTO DG, everybody is present on the floor to take the mandate from the leaders. And that is where also the agenda is set globally. It is not what you discuss in the WTO, it is not what is discussed in the WHO, or it is not in the IMF, but it is here in this floor of G20, that's where the mandate is being given to them. And that is why the G20 becomes critical as we go forward. Because as correctly pointed out by our Sherpa earlier, what started as an outcome of the financial crisis has today evolved into really the agenda setting institution globally. It has gone much beyond the finance, and that is why we have the Sherpa track also, which focuses on the other issues, the non-finance set of issues. And here, the question to be asked is the cost of compromise becoming so high that is there a threat of these institutions losing their relevance? That is what we really need to ponder over going down the line. Because, as pointed out by our Sherpa earlier, today when it is a situation of 19 versus 1, and tomorrow it could on one issue, tomorrow it could be 19 versus 1 on some other issue, and third it could be 18 versus 2 on a third issue. Because we should remember these institutions, they function on the principle of consensus, and to arrive at a consensus you do have to make a compromise. And if you are making a compromise, then is there a fear of you losing your relevance? Because as also earlier pointed out by our Sherpa, that the G20 also needs to address the people who are not in the room. It needs to address the remaining 160 odd countries around the world also. It needs to take their interests also into account. But here, if there's only a compromise making, it's the art of compromise making which is going to be shaping the final outcome. And then that is not what the remaining 160 countries are going to be looking forward to, number one. And number two, also the moral right which the G20 has accorded to itself. Of course, it is 85%, it has the global economic heft. in terms of the trade, in terms of GDP, in terms of population, etc. It's the 20 largest economies of the world. But the moral right comes from the fact that when they set an agenda, they set it for the global benefit. Now, if the global benefit is not being perceived, and today when all the institutions are being challenged by the unequal distribution of globalization, the benefits of globalization, then it is automatically going to raise a question as to what is the benefit accruing to us from the G20 process itself. Okay? And this is something which we really need to address as we go down the line on how do we take it forward, because I mean, I also saw this in a few other multilateral institutions also, which I had attended even recently. This challenge is going to continue because it is not only the trade-related challenges which we are seeing. We also saw earlier the climate change-related challenges, but today increasingly in the age of digital revolution, this is becoming a new area of challenge where we are not able to arrive at a compromise. Because on one hand, you have the big tech companies which are all based in the US, which are very particular on protecting their freedom. On the other side, you have the continental divide, where Europe and other countries are particular in ensuring that the big tech companies are being made accountable. So that is leading to a third set of sharp differences emerging between, let's say, the US and other major economies and plus other developing countries also. So, and that is going to become equally important going down the line. And that is also going to be a challenge for India. Frankly, when we reach 2022, it is going to be a challenging period. That's how I look at it. Because we are already seeing globally the economic situation. It is not really a very healthy situation. As you're all aware, the recession, the slowdown in the global economy is now come to the Asian century also. All the Asian countries are also beginning to get impacted. But the bigger challenge what we have in Asia is that we don't have the economic resources to handle this challenge. That is where the main problem comes to, that's where the main problem we all face. And unfortunately, unless the West also works with us in addressing these challenges, I don't know if we would be able to really meaningfully address these challenges. But also the same problem of the unequal distribution of the globalization, that today there is lack of appetite for coordinating the policies, for addressing it from a macro perspective. The preference is more for narrow approaches, preference is more for nationalism superseding the international cooperation, and which means ultimately it is us, the developing countries, which would be facing the bulk of the problem, and without any fallback option, frankly speaking. And this will only increase over the period, and presumably, who knows, maybe kind of hitting the peak in 22 or 23. And interestingly, for the first time, I mean, Argentina did have the presidency last year, but in substantive terms, it will be India which will be the first developing country to host the G20. And so there is also a lot of excitement within the G20 because they believe that they would be able to kind of make it a meaningful agenda for the developing countries, with India, of course, setting the tone and tenor of the agenda. But what is interesting is that Indonesia is also contemplating taking over the G20 presidency after India in 23. So which means we would be really able to shape the agenda going forward, India and Indonesia working together. And we believe that we can actually make it a coalition of developing countries agenda, so to say. That is how we are looking at it. And as Sherpa earlier mentioned, we are looking forward to working closely with Saudi Arabia from now onwards in terms of setting a forward-looking agenda, which can also lead into India's presidency itself in 22. These are just a few words which I wanted to mention. And just a couple of points for Ambassador Mohan Kumar's benefit. Ambassador, just for the benefit, sir, of RIS, I was just recently in Paris. I came back on the weekend. I took the opportunity to visit the OECD headquarters also. And as you're aware, OECD is an important knowledge partner for the G20 process. And we had a discussion proposing that perhaps in December we could have a joint event with RIS on G20. And I hope it will materialize. I'll continue to follow up with them on that. In fact, a team is expected to come sometime in a month or two to sort out all the details. So I wanted to mention that to you. And I do look forward to receiving the benefit of what you just now mentioned, sir, about conducting an exercise and getting inputs from all the distinguished members on the floor and outside. Because it's true, already we are talking of how do we go forward and what should constitute our agenda. We are starting it on a broader platform. As then we'll narrow it down as the international, depending upon how the international economic situation and other situations plays out. But by next year, we want everything to be in place, so to say. And I must confess also that starting from August, we're also starting to focus into the logistics in terms of the structures, the physical structures, how are they ready, and what is the work needed to be done on that. It's like we're really having a very ambitious program going forward from our end also. And we will be happy to keep having these interactions once in a while to brief you, to give you an update, and also to benefit from your own experiences and advice. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for organizing it. And again, my thanks to all of you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Suresh. And the questions that you posed to the RIS, all of it is in the affirmative. We are happy to work with you whenever you want and wherever you want. That's not an issue at all. And I sincerely hope my request for questions and inputs will be, forthcoming. The Honorable Sherpa has to go to the Parliament. I have somehow persuaded him that if he can take at least 2 or 3 questions, we'll start with Ambassador Man Singh, Mr. Sriram Cholia, and maybe Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan. But okay, lady at the back, sir, if you allow me. So let's begin with Ambassador Man Singh. Ye mic yahan de dijiye. He really has to leave in 10 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you for that comprehensive briefing. But sir, may I remind you, you're not only a Sherpa, you're also a mountaineer so far as economic policy is concerned. So I'm going to ask you about something. You ended your briefing by saying there's a world outside G20. But it also was clear from Osaka that there was a world outside the conference room of G20 in Osaka. The global attention was focused on what was happening outside. And I want to ask you about 2 things which will be relevant for India. One is, which way is the US-China trade war going? Because we are ourselves facing a mini trade war with the United States, and it's not looking very good, with Trump calling us the king of tariff. So there is this projection of India as a protectionist country, which has been enhanced by the budget, judging by the comments on that. And the other issue which I think is of relevance is, which way is the RCEP going, if you picked up anything from Osaka, and if you would like to share with us. Thank you.
Both are very important issues, but let me tell you, I am no longer a commerce industry minister. So I don't want to give comments which will probably not be right to do. But so RCEP, I don't know really what is the latest situation. I think the Commerce Minister will hopefully clarify soon. On the first point, actually, if you look at it, what is the cause of the beginning of the so-called, I don't really believe in war, but whatever is so-called trade war, is a huge trade deficit that US has with China. But it is not the only country where US has trade issues. It is also with their traditional trade partners like NAFTA, Canada, Mexico, others. With EU, not only the trade partners but also NATO partners. Not only them, but also with Japan and Korea, which again have been one of the strong allies of US for a very long time. So actually, it's really picking an overall bigger issue of US trade deficit with other countries in the world. And this is the interpretation of America First policy. That, if you want to make America first, then you must protect the trade. And trade will create, if you protect it, will create jobs, it will bring manufacturing back. That's a presumption. So I think in that context, if you look at it, I don't think any country which will have trade surplus will not face such a situation. So you must be knowing that the US is also thinking about, not only they started with steel and aluminum, that's how this whole process started, but now they are thinking about automobiles to be imported into US, and because US is the largest market. Now China has overtaken them slightly, but still US continues to be the most important automobile market. And not all the automobiles that are used in US are made in US. So therefore, this is another big issue. But I really don't know how it will turn out to be. When it reaches a flashpoint and they again get back to, I hope they resolve the issues. Even in Osaka, there was on the sidelines of Osaka G20 summit, there was a meeting between President of China, President of US. I think they are meeting again. I don't know how it will really play out, but it's actually start with, and that's why even the US was talking about China, India, because India also has a trade surplus with US. Incidentally, probably the only country where we have the trade surplus. And you have been the ambassador to US also, so we really know the situation. So I think we have to wait and watch. That's the only thing we can do. On RCEP, I'm sure as it's not fair for me to say anything on RCEP.
Suresh ji, just a couple of questions. You mentioned 19 plus 1. Suresh Reddy ji also mentioned. My question is, when you interact practically with the G20 colleagues, what is the perception? I mean, is this multilateralism -1 really sustainable, or are we pretending that it's the, the process is going on and everything is fine and we still have a common? So, or actually is it fundamentally fractured and actually is it broken and cannot be revived? The second question, sir, given your G20 experience over many summits, I wanted to know which are maybe the top 3 countries, member countries, with whom India has maximum coincidence of interest and with whom we work very closely, frequently and almost unanimously together on most issues. Because obviously 20 is a big group, and then within it there will be smaller minilaterals or plurilaterals with whom we coordinate our positions, be it on the declaration or even on the agenda and the summit. So who are our best friends in G20, sir, and who have been steadfastly with us throughout the years on most issues?
In the world, we have to think about the real world. In real world, everybody is your friend and everybody is not your friend. So that's how you have to accept the reality. The friendship is based on interest. See, this is what has been said even by Chanakya many, many years ago. So, you have to find out your commonality of interest. There is nothing like one friend. So if he's my friend, it means he'll agree on everything that I tell him. It's not possible. Even in day-to-day life, it doesn't happen like that. So obviously, it's an interest which actually we have to find out where the convergence of interest takes place. And that's how the new grouping keep developing. So the BRICS, for example, is actually not something which the BRICS countries themselves thought about. There was actually a very interesting paper which was written by Goldman Sachs economist Rupa, Purushottam, Rupa Purushottam. I do not Rupa, but somebody who wrote that, Rupa Purushottam. She wrote that paper, but it was BRSC. S was added later on. So this is, the grouping is now obviously because they are emerging countries. That's what the grouping has taken. There's a basic grouping. So there will be groupings which will keep happening based on interest. So there's nothing like in G20 we have this friend. Like for example, with the best of friends, you may not have agreement on all issues. So we have some strategic relationship with Japan. And Japan is not having strategic relationship with so many countries. So, this is very few countries Japan has got this so-called strategic relationship. And India is one of them, in which every 6 months, Prime Minister goes there, every 6 months their Prime Minister comes here. Such a close relationship doesn't mean that we'll agree on everything. There could be a different opinion on some issues. So there's nothing like closest friends which will agree on everything. That never happens in life also, doesn't happen in the country's interest also. Again, the interest keeps changing. What you think today may not happen. For example, with India and China, we try to work together on some of the issues, like climate change. Even on trade issues, we work together because there is a commonality of interest. Doesn't mean that everything India believes China will agree, what China believes India will agree. It always happens like that. So there's nothing of that kind. So I think it is inevitably, we have to accept the reality, find out the interest and try to promote. Any case, any foreign policy must protect the domestic interest, any countries. So we also have to find out what is our domestic interest, which country in the world would like to work together to protect those interests without harming their own. And that is how the foreign policy will always be there.
You can introduce yourself, please.
I'm Shireen, and thank you so much, sir, for your time and knowledge sharing. So my question is our farmers are trapped in vicious loop of loans and suicides and the things that they cannot sell their produce even. So how your government is going to fix this thing and how you're strengthening them, our farmers basically.
No, see, I'll tell you, this is a very important issue. Agriculture is a very important issue, and for India, agriculture is not just an economic activity, it has a social dimension because it's a source of livelihood for millions of people. So we obviously feel. Now the farmer suicide has to be avoided we must try to bring it to zero. That's a mission of our government. In fact, that's why we are trying to make doubling farmers' income, which is a priority. And there are many dimensions to doubling farmers' income. When you talk about, in fact, I spoke about when I was speaking on the budget only a few days ago in the parliament on the same issue. You can look at agriculture from agriculture perspective. That means you can look at agriculture as land, water, pesticides, insecticides, electricity, all this is agriculture. Or you can look at agriculture from a farmer's perspective, which is completely different than looking at agriculture from agriculture perspective. So farmer, obviously, because you call him farmer, that means he's working on the farm. So agriculture and farm has a symbiotic relationship. But looking at same issue from a different perspective gives us a different dimension to thinking. So we feel that farmers have to be protected first, and therefore agriculture growth will happen, incidentally will happen anyway. And without agriculture growth, farmers will not benefit. But unless you look at farmer as a driving force, as a focal point for discussing it. So there are many dimensions. So one dimension which I'll mention, because my dear friend Ambassador Mansingh was reminding me about commerce days. So we made first ever India's agri-export policy. In fact, the chairman of Agriculture Price Export Development Agency is here. He will tell you, first ever. It has never been made in the past. We have a target of $100 billion of agriculture export, for which a detailed plan has been worked out, which commodity from which, not only state but which district. All 29 states have been taken on board, so we are working on it.
I'm going to, if you don't mind, sir, Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan, and then Ambassador Suresh Goyal, Mr. Mukul, Ambassador Mukul, and then the lady. We'll lump it together, because otherwise he has to go. So the last 4 questions, very brief,
please,
sir.
we'll continue with this. No,
brief.
please.
Okay. My question is about paragraph 36 of the Leaders' Declaration, which is very alarming because it is pure reflection of the US view on climate change. And it makes claims like we are the leaders in reducing emissions and that we have withdrawn from the Paris Agreement because of taxpayers and business suffering. It's a very dangerous kind of statement.
Thank you, sir.
What pressures led to this inclusion of this paragraph?
So, sir, I will compile all questions. The one paragraph that the declaration devotes just to US and which expresses the US point of view. So his concern is whether, I think Mr. Suresh Reddy also referred to it, does it set a precedent, and others? Ambassador Suresh Goyal.
So very briefly, considering that this time the bilateral differences, not just trade and economic but political differences, played out so openly in the summit, what do you think is the future of G20?
Okay.
5 years down the line.
Okay, future of G20 in the light of that one paragraph, I'm assuming, or emerging from that. Ambassador Mukul.
So thank you for your briefing. Just a question going forward. While the perennials will always be there at every summit, and you pointed to that, the energy security, the food security, the multilateral trading institution, what would be specific? What is the big idea that India can bring in 2022? I would believe that development has really not been addressed in the G20. In fact, the Seoul summit, the 5th summit, did it by default because it was felt after London and Pittsburgh that the financial crisis had run its course. So it was in a way a default kind of thing, but I don't think it has been actually addressed. So maybe development in the larger perspective would be the big idea for 2022. Of course, we have our specifics there regarding the fugitive economic offenders, the artificial intelligence and things which we have been pushing. But I thought that is, I don't know how you react to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Mukul. The last question by the lady, and then the Honorable Minister has to go. He really has to go. Sir, I will remind you about the 4 points.
Good morning, sir. My name is Savitri Singh. I am from the cooperatives. So it's always a pleasure listening to Prabhuji. And my question is on the statement made by Mr. Mohan Kumar about aging issues in Japan. So Japan is worried about aging population, but I think we also have issues around youth bulge in our country. And how we are thinking, and is there any concrete plan and policy to mainstream youth and
engaging youth gainfully in nation building and all those areas? Thank you.
So, sir, if you allow me to recapitulate, para 36, American position, future of G20, and the big idea for 2022, and the youth bulge, gainful employment of youth as opposed to aging in Japan. Those are the four. Very quickly answer.
You know, Ambassador, as you know better than me, because you have been practicing diplomacy all your life and I have a lot of respect for it. See, what do you do in a situation like this? This is the reality. You have to accept the reality as it emerges. In fact, this was the compromise which was reached at the end of it. The other choice was having no communication. So I think I must compliment Japan for taking leadership, and in fact Japan also has acknowledged the fact that we supported India to make sure that we have some good agreement. So it's a reality. As far as what you are saying about the future of G20, see, actually really look at it like this. G20 is a forum in any case, it's not as a permanent institution. But you know, what is G20? It represents 83, 84% or maybe 85% of the global GDP. So, you know, and the world, which is so interconnected, and now I don't think there is really any choice for us to go back to the pre-connectivity world. You know, this is really not possible anymore because we have developed the global supply chains in a way, and not just global supply chains for goods. As I was trying to say when I was talking about infrastructure, all the banking system globally is so interconnected. And if you recall pre-2008 when there was this the Southeast Asian banking crisis, that time the Prime Minister of Malaysia had said that, you know, this capital flight is a problem, how can you take the money out? But this is how the banks function today. That a SWIFT will take away the money without even time that takes for an eyelid. So it's just going to happen. So in a situation like that, I don't know what is a solution but to bring all these countries have to work together, because it is like interdependence and economic interdependence. So that is something which I think will force countries to work together. As a reality, there may be some hiccups here and there, but I don't think there is any choice really, and there is no alternative, in my opinion, to make it happen. But at the same time, what you are saying is geopolitics is also an issue. But I hope one day geoeconomics will also overpower the geopolitics and try to put everything together. But I think that brings us to this point that you asked me. What is that big idea? Can we have an overriding idea that can then bind all these countries and even more countries together? Because, you know, we are seeing G20, some of these countries are very emerging countries. Indonesia, India, Brazil, Mexico, you can say in a different category. But there are countries which will be again in the second round, which are not part of 20, but will be in the third wave of growth. They will be coming. So maybe G20, maybe number also can become over a period of time, depending upon the economic size of the basket. As you always say, you know, global economic changes always takes place. But I think that big idea, what is that big idea? I don't have that to tell you just now, but I hope that I was saying we should collectively try to think about that big idea. We should try to think together what could be that overriding big idea which can bring everybody together. I think that is a very important challenge, and it is possible because we are putting ideas into basket, which I also did, that economic, social, political, cultural, maybe something like that. But can you put into some one big thing which can then drive this entire world? And it is possible. In fact, many times, if you think coolly, you can say, why did I not think about it? It may not be an idea which is an extraordinary, but even a small little thing which can actually bring everybody together. So I think we need to think through and work on it. But I think economic interdependence will inevitably bring countries together. And particularly large countries with large economies, they have no choice. For example, this is what Ambassador was also asking. You know, China is the largest economy, US is the largest economy, China is the second largest economy. But they are so intertwined in terms of their supply chains and many others. And not only their economies are driving. Southeast Asian economies, actually, incidentally, not necessarily all the times, but when China was having trade surplus with several other countries in the world, was also having trade deficit with ASEAN. What is the reason? That means China's supply chain were also coming from there. So China and US trade war, or India, US, whatever countries trade war, is not just going to be a bilateral issue for those countries to be resolved among themselves. This will affect so many other countries in the world in a different way. And therefore, I think we'll have to work together. There is, really speaking, no choice for anybody to not to think about that. On the youth, and this is something which is an opportunity for us, actually, because for some time, as I was saying, India is not going to remain young for all life. They'll also, after some time, we'll also be aging. But for few years, or maybe 15, 20 years, we have an opportunity in which young population in India can service rest of the world. And therefore, our strategy should be, how can we do that? In fact, there are a lot of initiatives, including with Japan, we are trying to work on that, is how can we service the aging population of other countries by our young population, which will need to acquire different kind of skills, including language skills and many others. But that is something which is possible. So I think it's an opportunity, at least there is a window available.
Sir, Ambassador Nalin Suri, because I can never say no to him.
No, he's my friend also.
Was that the focus of G20 should be on infrastructure development. I think we need to go back to that very seriously. If that can be the focus of the 2022 summit in India, and this has other advantages. You can add connectivity to this and you have an alternative to what. So I think if you look at connectivity and investment together and have concrete projects, which will be the focus of our summit, I think we will really be doing a service not only to ourselves, but to the entire region.
I fully agree with you. In fact, just to develop that point, I had proposed to the Australian, when Australia was the presidency, that we should bring countries together where the resources, because see, actually we feel that those who have financial resources are better off. Actually, they are also in a serious problem, because if they don't deploy the resources, they are running a cost of those resources. It's like a bank which is flush with fund is a liability for the people who run the bank, because that means you are having cost. Deposit is a cost to you. Deposit comes incidentally as a chartered accountant, I can say, on the liability side. It doesn't come on the asset side. So if you have the deposits only in the bank and which are not deployed, that means bank will run into losses, because you are incurring costs without attendant benefit. So what you are saying is absolute right. So that's what exactly I said. We should organize a round table of countries which are resources, the countries which needs such investment in terms of infrastructure, which actually I proposed 2014. I think this is a very good idea which we can do, but I think this could be one of the, as you said, correct, I agree with you.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to ask my colleague, visiting fellow RIS, Mr. Augustine Peter, to give a very brief vote of thanks. Just to take you up on the idea, RIS is going to organize part of the T20 think tanks. We will have a discussion on what should be done in the future. We will try out this idea of infrastructure and other ideas which may come. Mr. Augustine Peter, you have the floor.
An excellent session is coming to an end. Like in a broad canvas, Sri Suresh Prabhu depicted the entire scenario, the way G20 is emerging and the run-up to the 2022 presidency of India. On behalf of RIS and all those present here, sir, I would like to convey our heartfelt thanks to you for being here. We look forward to your further guidance and participation in our programs. Sri Suresh Reddy, Joint Secretary MEA, is a veteran in multilateral economic cooperation issues. He has been always cooperative, and he has also promised that with OECD there will be a session which will be organized by RIS. We take it up with all-hearted cooperation. Thank you very much. We have a galaxy of eminent diplomats and other eminent persons and distinguished guests. On behalf of RIS, I thank all of you. And we say this is from RIS, it is just a start of the consultation process to the run-up to the 2022. In January, we are going to organize, and in November also, as it has been promised, we expect cooperation from all of you, and thank you very much. All are invited for the lunch. Thank you.